Hi, I'm Will, and I like toys. We started this journey of these videos with Transformers. I'm going to take a break from Transformers for a little bit so that I can share some toys I picked up on a recent trip to Europe. My wife and I went on a trip to Europe. Her mom, my mother-in-law, came with us. And of course, I went to a bunch of comic book stores and toy stores. My favorite thing to do when I visit a European country. So these will be just the toys that I picked up. We'll keep it kind of short this time. So the very first country, we had about 24 hours in Dublin. We were going back to Ireland later, but very beginning, I hit up a few different comic shops in town, including Forbidden Planet, Dub City Comics, and Sub City Comics. Dublin City Comics, Sub City Comics, and Forbidden Planet. In one of them, I believe it was Sub City Comics, the very first thing I picked up is a vintage Scythe from Thundercats. For those who don't know, he is one of the mutates, one of the villains from Thundercats. I don't have a lot of Thundercats toys. I've always wanted them. But so, the very first thing that I wanted to add to my collection when I saw this was Scythe. In that shop, they had a whole bunch of glass cases with vintage toys, modern toys. They had some vintage Star Wars, some He-Man, some Ninja Turtles, but this was the first thing that jumped out at me. He now sits on the shelf over here. I don't know if you can see, but there is a vintage Mumra without his Mumra the Ever-Living, so the big scary one, without his headdress, sitting in that Jeep. But Scythe sits over there now. The only other Thundercat character I have is probably just off camera, right up here, is a Super 7 Ultimate Linkso. I definitely want to get more. I've been wanting Vulture Man, who's another one of the villains, the mutates. Monkeyin, Jackal Man, those are all the mutates. I'd love to get some more of the actual Thundercats themselves, like Tigra or Bengali. Not a big Lion-O fan, but if I do get them, I would like the one that's the vintage color from the toy. So, that bright yellow, that bright red, that bright orange. I love the bright colors, if you can't tell from some of the toys behind me. But so Scythe has joined the collection. Other than having a little bit of a loose leg, he's in really good condition. He's got that sort of angry old man smirking face. Reminds me a lot of Charlie's landlord from Always Sunny in early seasons of Always Sunny. I think his name is Wong or Wang. This one also still has his action feature, where you move one of the scales on his back and he slams around. I don't have any of his weapons, but that doesn't bother me in the slightest. So that's the first thing I picked up in Dublin. Next, we went to Milan, which I didn't realize, but Milan and Italy, huge manga, huge comic fans. We stayed near Chinatown in Milan, all kinds of shops with little blind boxes and stuff. I didn't pick up any manga or anything anime related, but we will take a look at some of the Italian comics I picked up later. But first, one of the things I picked up was from a toy store that was near the Duomo, the iconic cathedral. There's a toy store around the corner, and I picked up this. I love picking up something weird and different. Usually they're smaller figures that I pick up. Like I've got a Lucky Luke, and I've got a Marisupilami character, some European characters. But this is from a UK show called Gigantosaurus, which was a kid show about dinosaurs. And this is Mazu, who is an ankylosaur. And he was on clearance, and I have a warm spot in my heart for ankylosaurs, because when I was little, I called them comb dinosaurs because I would take them and try to comb my hair with the spikes on his back. So I'm very happy to have this guy. I don't know much about him, I've never seen the cartoon, but there was something about his expression and the hand up, felt very, Muppet adjacent, and I love a dinosaur. And I loved his little leaf satchel. So he is added to the collection. The thing I was the most surprised about and excited about when we went to Milan was there's a famous Italian comic publisher called Sergio Bonelli Editori, who makes Dylan Dog, Tex, and a bunch of others. But Dylan Dog and Tex are like two of their biggest. And I own some Tex comic books over here from the last time we were in Italy and Rome. I have some Dylan Dog, but this time I picked up a whole bunch of stuff. And we'll talk about that in the comic video. But they're apparently from Milan originally, and they have their original, they have one of their only, if not only, retail spaces in Milan. So I went there. So cool. Definitely set up for comic signings. There's different artists who have visited have done like little sketches and graffiti designs on the shelves. Huge selection of vintage reprints and modern stuff. But the thing I was very interested by is they had a bunch of these little figurines on stands from Tex, the cowboy comic. And it was from the anniversary, and so every month they released a new one. So instead of going with a classic cowboy or a strongman or a Native American character, I went with this one because it seemed the most out of place and so odd. L'Alieno, so it's the alien in Italian, and he has a laser gun and he has this sort of space hammer. He's a bad guy. They confirmed for me. They were very nice and confirmed, but he's really cool, and I love that his base has sort of this American Southwest look to it. But I definitely need to read more text. I did read a bunch of Dylan Dog while we were there, and we'll talk about that in the comic video, but I definitely am interested in text now, knowing that an alien cowboy shows up, and his name is just the Alien, and he's pretty evil. So this guy's joined the collection. Then we went to Copenhagen in Denmark, which we had been to before, and I had visited a few comic shops there. But there was a new shop that I hadn't visited called Ruben and Bobby, which had a few locations and is a barber shop and a vintage toy store. They were really cool, really nice. I only was able to go there once when they were open. Their hours kind of fluctuate because it is a barber shop, depending on what kind of customers they have. So definitely call ahead if you're going. But they have two locations. I went to the one that was a little further outside of the main Copenhagen area, near this giant cemetery and historic park. And it is wall-to-wall, used, beat up, dusty action figures, vehicles, accessories. They have old arcade games, old video games. They even had like Commodore 64 cartridges, which came in like a little tape cassette box, and the prices were super reasonable, and the people were there were really nice. They were cutting people's hair, and they have shelves with like Ninja Turtles and who else? Toxic Avenger and Biker Mice from Mars and Power Rangers and Trash Bag Bunch and just so many things all over. I saw a clearance bin that was immediately like the equivalent of 50 cents to $1. And dug through it and found this figure of the Lone Ranger from the 80s Lone Ranger movie, which one didn't know existed. I'm a big Lone Ranger fan. I've read some of the original books, I've listened to the radio shows, I've seen the more modern movie, I've read the comic books from Dynamite. Big fan. So he is missing a hand, and he doesn't have his guns, and he's got a little crack on his back, but for the equivalent of like 50 cents, very excited to add a Lone Ranger who can pose to my collection, because he's got a bit of a wide stance, but you can sit him on a horse. Now I have to find him a horse. He is joining on the shelf a vintage Lone Ranger that this was my uncle's or my grandfather. Let's see, when's it from? 1967, this one. So this was my uncle's. Normally sits on the shelf with the Star Trek and the Penguin and Winnie the Pooh and Charlie Brown, because those are all toys from my uncle, from my grandparents' house when my grandmother moved. So this Lone Ranger sits up there with this Lone Ranger who now joined the collection. And I really love that you can't really see it in this light, but he definitely has the light blue. He's got the white hat. He's got a little red neckerchief. I'm so happy to add this. And it felt fitting after reading some text and getting, Gunslinger Alien to add another gunslinger to the collection. Now, the thing I was really surprised to find there, because I was very surprised to see this, but then in retrospect it made sense, a Mummies Alive figure. This was a 90s cartoon, late 90s, from Deke Animation, and it was in the tail end of that, like, what if there were weird mutant versions of X who were a team of like 4 or 5, like very much Ninja Turtle ripoffs. So, after your Street Sharks, after your Biker Mice, after your Battletoads, after your Creepy Crawlers, after your Extreme Dinosaurs, they had Mummies Alive. And this is Wrath, who's like the wise sort of wizard priest of the group. I've been looking for this one for cheap, and he was $250, I think was the conversion from Danish kroner to USD. He is missing some of his armor. He has one of his little removable feet and shin plates, and he has a removable torso armor. The rest of the armor clips on here, and there's like a cobra snake top, and then a part that wraps around, and then I think a staff and another foot thing. But I was so happy to get him. I have 2 other Mummies Alive figures that I have to dig out now of the sort of big bruiser character whose name escapes me right now, whose armor was a ram, and he only had one arm, so he had this big bronze punching arm. And then I think J-Cal or Jackal. I feel like it's spelt Jackal, but they said J-Cal, who's the like brave leader whose armor is like a hawk, like Horus. I love Egyptian mythology, and I was very happy to find Wrath, who had been on my toy hunt list, which is a massive spreadsheet I have in Google Docs, and there was nothing quite so nice as deleting that line from the sheet, much like when I deleted it for Slythe, who was also on my list of things to keep an eye out. So that was a great surprise. Then after we were done in Copenhagen, and I'd picked up more comics, we had a lovely time, got a tattoo, ate some food, we went back to Ireland. And we mostly stayed outside of Dublin on the coast of Dingle. It was beautiful. Check out the Streetlight Travel blog for more information on our fun vacation. That's where my wife was tracking all of our food and fun stuff that we did. But we had, I don't know, I had like maybe 20 minutes between taking a tour to see the Book of Kells at Trinity University and before some comic and toy stores closed. And so I literally ran across Dublin, went and checked out some comic stores again, the ones I had been to, and picked up some cool comics I'll talk about. But then popped into a toy store that was a giant toy store. I had never heard of this company. I'm going to have to look up what they're called. But it felt like a classic Toys R Us from the 80s and 90s in all of its glory. And they had about 5 minutes before they were closing, and they were making announcements trying to get everyone out of there. And there was a bunch of people, so I didn't feel too guilty. But I was walking around. The prices there were all over the place, because, you know, they've got a lot of American imports of Transformers and G.I. Joe, and Transformers are just expensive everywhere because of the Takara Tomy licensing and the amount of engineering and molds that go into them. They had a ton of wrestling and Disney and board games and all kinds of stuff, and it was cool. And there were a few things that piqued my interest, including a Hot Wheels car of the Robbie Reyes Ghost Rider car that had the little flames on it, and that was cool. And that was like €5, and I was like, that's a lot for a Hot Wheels car, but it'll fit in my luggage. At that point, the luggage was full. Then I found their clearance section, and I found something I had really been looking for: the Masters of the Universe She-Ra Origins cartoon collection man-tenna. Man-tenna is one of the members of the Evil Horde, a group led by Hordak, who fights He-Man and She-Ra at various points. I have other members of the Horde. I've got Hordak, Leech, and Grizzlor. I'm a fan of that batch. I've always liked the villains in those cartoons more. I'd been wanting a Leech. They, of course, at San Diego Comic-Con just announced a new version of Leech who looks more monstrous. But I liked this sort of goofy cartoon look, because to me, the sort of skinny neck, the extra bright colors, that felt more Leech. He has an action feature where you push a button in the back and his eyes pop out. And like the other Origins Masters of the Universe figures, parts pop off so you can like swap him around. So I could swap him around with my only other Origins figure, Masters of the Universe Michelangelo. Not going to, because I think he's pretty perfect, but he's got his 4 legs, very posable, and he was on the clearance aisle for the same price as that Hot Wheels, €5, when he had been on my list. Once again, another thing I got to delete from my spreadsheet, and he is like 15 or 20 bucks here, so I was very happy to add him to the collection. So yeah, I had a very sort of 80s, 90s, and older themed toy hunt, where I got Man-tenna and Slythe and Wrath and the Lone Ranger and then the alien from Tex, but and then of course Mazu, the Gigantosaurus from the UK Dinosaur Show. But I was so happy to see the amount of weird vintage toys in these stores and the amount of comic books, and I wasn't the only one in any of these shops. I wasn't the only one buying these things. It was really nice. So that's it for this time. Like I said at the beginning, I'm Will, and I like toys. Next time, we'll talk about some comics that I picked up on this European trip. I hope everyone has a great day.